Good morning, everyone. So today we're going to be kind of going through some nice, simple, more intro level mobility work, focusing on continuing to expand our breath through that crocodile breathing, and taking it into a little bit more deep hip work related to gait. A little bit of a focus on internal to external hip rotation, specific to gait mechanics. I'll try to voice that in the class. So let's get started. We're going to start on our back. And I want to get into our crocodile breath. So we're going to make our nice big C shapes with our hands, placing our hands below the ribs, below the 12th rib and above the hip bone in that nice meaty space in our abdominal area. Remember, I want to have the index finger pressing into the abdominals, the side of the hand pressing into the side body, and the thumbs pressing into the low back. And we'll start with taking a nice deep breath in through the nose, filling up that abdominal space, breathing into the belly, and on the exhale, drawing the navel all the way into the spine, really pressing all that air out. Full expression of that breath. As you exhale, squeeze your hands in, index finger, side of the palm, and thumb, like really press in order to give your body some resistance to breathe into. And on that next inhale, see if you can fill out all 6 points of contact on the hands. Feel them expand outward like a balloon. And then on the exhale, drawing navel all the way into spine. And again, squeezing into it on each one in order to maintain that resistance. And we'll get a good 5 to 6 full deep breaths in and out. With each one, start to notice how well you can expand out into those 6 points of contact of your hand. Do you feel that breath going more forward into your index fingers and less into the side or the palms or into the thumbs? And if you're noticing that, bring the intention of your breath to see if you can change that focus to fill in the areas where it's not moving as well. And I want to continue to work this breath in throughout the class. So let's go ahead and drop the hands down, but continue to breathe in fully. Inhale, inflating out into that abdominal space. Exhale, drawing navel into spine, trying to maintain that expansion, even though we don't necessarily have our hands there to give us a connection to it. And as we're doing this, we're going to slowly come up into an inverted sit position. Legs are right out in front, bringing hands, palms right down, kind of close to the hips, side of the hips. If you're finding that your arms feel shorter than your torso and you need to lean back a little bit, that is fine. Grounding downward through the palms, extending the elbows fully, and lifting up the spine towards the ceiling. The first thing we're going to work on here is kind of coming back into that breath, filling up the abdominal space, and then on the exhale, drawing the navel into the spine. As you feel that breath, notice on the inhale, as you're filling up, kind of pressing into the floor and letting yourself get nice and tall. And as you exhale, drawing the navel into the spine, allow your pelvis to soften and round so that you get a little rounding of your lower back. And then as you inhale, pressing down into the floors, getting the spine nice and tall again. Again, on the exhale, drawing the navel in and allowing the pelvis to start to scoop ever so slightly to feel that low back get a little mobilized. And we're going to go back and forth on that inhale to exhale. I want to continue that breath moving through the pelvis, and we're going to start to get some movement now through the shoulders. As you inhale, feel the shoulder blades press downward into the floor as your chest lifts and opens up to the ceiling. As you exhale, allow the shoulders to round a little bit forward and up towards the ears. Now we're getting this nice rounding into the upper back. On that exhale, inhale, pressing the palms, getting tall, opening up the shoulders and the chest. And then the last little bit I want to add to this is I want to get some spiraling through the elbows. So as you exhale, pressing up, feel the elbow pits spiral outward. The pits of the elbows, I want them to kind of move out and away from the body. And that spiraling is going to go all the way up to the shoulders so that you feel your shoulders reach back and your chest open up as it's lifting up to the ceiling. And as you exhale, drawing the navel into spine, allow your elbows to internally rotate as your shoulders come all the way up to the ears. See if you can feel a nice, big, continuous stretch through the upper back, down into the lower back on that exhale. And on the inhale, can you feel your chest open up and get a nice little stretch across the top of the chest as you lift up towards the ceiling? On the next inhale, as we inhale, lifting up tall, I want to maintain that tall, upright position, continuing to pack the shoulders down, reaching through the floor. And now we're going to do some neck mobility from this position. And I'll come in a little closer to focus just on the neck. So staying nice and tall, I want to try to keep my cheekbones parallel. So I don't want my head to tilt on any of these movements. We're going to start by checking our blind spots. Slow rotation, looking over your right shoulder. Squeeze lightly into the end range without forcing it. Then bringing it back to center, and the same thing on the other side. Start light on each of these movements. I'm not looking for a massive stretch, but as I squeeze into that end range on each rep, I want to see if I can squeeze a little further into it without going into pain. And then start to notice, how does it feel differently when you turn your head to the right compared to turning your head to the left? Does one side feel tighter and more restricted? Are you able to turn as far? And I want to come back and notice that head tilt. I don't want to let my forehead tilt to one side as I'm rotating, because now I'm no longer straight up and down, spiraling. I'm getting this tilt and I'm almost reaching with my forehead. So make sure we keeping the head on top of the neck and spiraling through. Then we'll come back to center, and now we're going to do kind of our windshield wipers back and forth. Lightly dropping the ear towards the shoulder. I'm not reaching my ear down. It's just a light drop, enough to feel some slight stretch in the side of the neck. Coming back up to center, and then the same thing on the other side. Exhale as you let your ear drop. Inhale as you bring it back to center. And again, I want to make sure we are avoiding any kind of pain, especially when we're working around the neck area. And now I want to add to this movement, continuing to let the ear drop. Now the opposite ear, I want to imagine we got a piece of string attached to the earlobe, lifting that ear up so we get a little bit more traction in this side of the neck to kind of feel that little bit more stretch. I don't want it to be forced. I don't want it to be massive. I want it to feel good and juicy. And I also want to make sure that we're still pressed down through the shoulders. So as you lift up that ear, feel that same side hand press down and away to activate that stretch just a little bit more. And with each one, We're lightly squeezing into that end range just a little bit more without forcing it to see if it can slowly improve and get a little better. And then we'll come back to our center. And now we're going to work on some kind of diagonal movements. So we're going to come right back to rotating, looking as far as you can to your shoulder, your blind spot. And from here, I want to work on down, gaze down to the floor, and then allowing our gaze up to the ceiling. And as we're doing this, I want to maintain that light squeeze of the rotation. So I'm still looking over my shoulder actively in order to maintain that squeeze into that blind spot as I'm looking up. And as I'm looking down, I'm continuing to maintain that squeeze into it. And then we'll bring it across and do the same thing on the other side. So squeezing into that blind spot, and then allowing your gaze to move down to the floor, and then up to the ceiling. Notice if this side feels different than the other side. Is the range of motion less? Does it feel tighter, more restricted? Does it create some other kind of symptoms? Do you feel dizzy? Do you feel some clicky, crepitus, crunchiness to it that's different on one side to the other? All of those things are going to be helpful in kind of getting an idea of what's going on in the neck and in other places. Again, continue to maintain that squeeze, looking over your shoulder as your gaze moves from up and down. And then we're going to come back to the other side again. And then we're going to go back into our gaze up and down, but now I want to work diagonals across from up and away to down and away. So we'll start looking over that blind spot, allow the gaze to go up to the ceiling, and then we're going to go diagonal across to the opposite side low, looking down and away. From here, we're going to move our gaze to up and away, and then diagonal across, down and away. Again, try to get that squeeze into that blind spot, that look over the shoulder, and maintain it until you release to go down and away to the other side. Notice how we're making kind of a figure 8 with our head, with our face. And after you do about 5 or so in one direction, now we're going to change directions. So starting from up and away, we're going to look down and away and go from down and away across to up and away to down and away, and then down and away across to up and away. Again, find that squeeze into that looking over the shoulder. Maintain it as your gaze goes from down or from up to down. And notice how, how does it feel on the right side compared to the left side? What are you kind of getting? Are there any sensations that you get? And then we'll come off our wrists. We can give them a little flow. We're going to change into our quadruped, coming up to hands and knees, spreading out fingers nice and wide, grounding palms, extending elbows fully without locking. And before we get into the wrist, I want to get back into our crocodile breath. Breathing and expanding into that abdominal space, not just forward into the belly, but also side body and into the low back. Nice inhale. On the exhale, drawing the navel into the spine. Get a good 2, 3, 4 breaths in. And then we can start moving into our wrists. On the exhale, lightly loading forward, feeling into the wrist space. On the inhale, rocking back and getting off the wrist a little bit. With each one, I want to be soft. I'm not forcing it. I want to make sure it's not painful. And I want to compare how does it feel on the right wrist compared to the left wrist. Is one side stiffer, achier, more restricted. Then we'll turn fingers out to the side and we'll get into our side to side. I want to exhale as I let my body move over a wrist. Inhale as we come back to the center. Again, each one I want to go slow in order to really feel into the wrist space, making sure it's not painful and noticing if there's any differences between the right side and the left side. If you need to take breaks on any of this as we're going through it, go ahead and come up and do some nice little wrist circles. Get some flow back into the wrist and come back into the movements. It's okay to keep these movements low in repetition, 2 to 3 reps, up to 5 to 10 reps, depending on how strong your wrists feel. I want to make sure that we're not getting into pain on the wrists. Next, we're going to turn fingers all the way back towards the knees. The closer the hands are, the less intense this is. The further out we come, the more intense. I don't want it to be massively intense. I want this to be good and juicy. From here, with the palms loaded, inhale as you're forward, exhale as you lightly let your hips reach back, keeping the palms down. Continuing to breathe into our crocodile breath. Feel that expansion on the inhale as you rock forward. Draw that navel all the way in as you rock back. You may notice that just that breath, that drawing the navel in as you rock back, adds a lot of stretch into the forearms. You don't need to rock back farther. Sometimes it's just getting into that breath a little deeper, and you're going to feel that all the way up into the wrists. Then we're going to flip our palms upside down. Again, this position tends to be really uncomfortable, so I want to make sure that we're staying soft. Allow the elbows to be soft and bendy. The first thing I want to feel into is that elbow space. How much can we extend the elbows, pushing down lightly into the floor without going to pain? Is there some stretch in that elbow? If so, I want to play in that space, letting it bend, and then extending into it, not forcefully, but kind of squeezing into it lightly to see if we can get a little further on each one without forcing it. If you can get to full elbow extension and it is not painful or stressful, then we can start to rock back hips to heels. Again, feeling into that wrist space, being nice and soft, and continuing to get into our crocodile breath at the same time. Again, I want to go ahead and take a little pressure off the wrist, do some wrist circles, get the flow back into them. We're going to come back into the wrist here in just a second for a couple more things. So again, if your wrists are getting tired, it's okay to come off of them, take a break, and then we'll come back into it. Coming back onto our hands, on palms. Now I want to get into our elbow spirals, similar to what we did in our inverted position, looking at the elbow pit, seeing how far forward can you spiral the elbow pit so that they're facing forward, and then how far can you rotate them so that they're facing back. And I want to feel that movement up into the shoulder or down into the wrist area. And I want to notice if it's different on the left side compared to the right side. Is one side more tight, restricted? Is it painful? If it's painful, I want to back off of it, make sure I'm not pushing into anything over a level 1 or a level 2. And do you have greater range of motion on one side than the other? And I want to squeeze into each of these ranges, spiraling elbows forward and spiraling elbows back to see if we can get a little bit more range of motion on each one without forcing it. And then we're going to change our focus into our feet. So tucking the big toe, I want to let the heels draw in towards each other as much as possible with the big toe tucked underneath. So only thing really loaded on the floor is the big toe. And from here, we're going to let our hips rock back to our heels, feeling that load of the big toe joint getting into the arch of the foot. Inhale, we're going to come forward. Exhale, we're softly rocking back. I want to be soft in that load on the big toe to start with. I want to make sure it is not painful. As we're getting into it with each one, we are squeezing lightly into that end range. I'm not forcing it. And I'm seeing if on each one, is it able to give me a little bit more range of motion without being stressful or painful? And start to notice if there's a difference in how the right big toe feels compared to the left big toe. Is one side tighter, stiffer, more restricted? My left toe, interestingly enough, feels a little tighter today than my right big toe, and that is not usually the case. Next, we're going to turn the heels out, and we're going to get as many of all the other toes tucked underneath. See if you can get the pinky toe tucked underneath. Pinky toe can be really hard to get tucked under, especially if foot mobility is new. So I want to see if we can start to get that toe mobilized a little bit more. So heels are rotated out, doing the exact same thing. Lightly rocking back hips to heels. Inhale forward, exhale as you sink into it. Continuing with our crocodile breath. Inhale, inflate that abdominal space. Exhale, draw the navel into spine. Being soft on it, but we're still squeezing lightly into that end range to see if we can get a little bit more on each one. And start to notice if there's a difference in how this feels on the right foot compared to the left foot. And then we're going to let our ankles go nice and flat. This last part, I want to kind of get into that front of the ankle space. So we're just seeing how far back our hips can go to the heels, rocking back forward, continuing with our belly breath, our crocodile breath. Exhale, draw the navel in as you sit back. This one's a good one to focus on, to pay attention to the knees as well as the ankles. How do the knees feel? Are they stiff? Is one side stiffer than the other? How does the front of the ankles feel? Is there a big gap between the ankle and the floor? Is it bigger on the right side than on the left, or the other way around? If you're able to get your hips all the way back to heels, you can start to sit all the way back, but I want to continue to kind of rock all the way forward. So I want to move in and out of these, the positions. There's a little bit of what we're doing that's helping to coat the joints with synovial fluid and also just grooving smooth movement into the joint. We'll come back to our hands, nice grounded palms, extended elbows. And now I want to get a little movement through the spine going into our cat-cows. So focusing on the pelvis first, getting some nice anterior tilt to posterior tilt. I'm going to let the pelvis tilt forward, feeling the belly move to the floor. We're going to get a little sway in our low back. And then we're going to scoop at the pelvis. I only want that scoop to go up to the ribs, so I'm not doing a big cat. I'm not pushing through my shoulders. I want to keep the upper body stiff and still. Inhale as your pelvis moves towards the floor and the belly opens up. Exhale, draw that navel into the spine as you scoop. See if you can feel this stretch, specifically in the low back area. Stretch and mobility. Doesn't need to be a big stretch. I don't want it to be a massive stretch. I definitely don't want it to be painful. But see if you can connect that breath in as your pelvis goes forward. As you exhale, notice how drawing that navel into your spine activates your core to help scoop the pelvis a little bit more. On that exhale, use that belly to try to get a little bit more scoop of the pelvis, kind of squeezing into that end range. This becomes kind of a very low level core activation, which can be really powerful. And now we're going to allow that movement to start to move up the rest of the spine. So as we scoop, continue to scoop and keep scooping. And allow that movement to move up into the upper back, pressing into the floor. Feel that movement stretch between the shoulder blades, and then it comes over the top of the head. And we're still scooping actively into it so that we're trying to touch our forehead and our tailbone at this imaginary point in the middle. See if you notice that exhale breath with that scoop to feel your lower core active. And then we're going to let the pelvis move to the floor, opening up the belly, creating a wave up the spine as it gets to the shoulders. Reach the sternum through towards the floor, and the head comes up last. And we're going to go back and forth. Exhale as you scoop. And notice how we're kind of making a nice wave action of the spine. Starting at the pelvis, and then it slowly works up the spine so that the head moves last. See how smooth you can make that wave, and continuing to sync our breath. Inhale into that crocodile breath. Because of the position that we're moving into that breath, the breath is going to go more forward into the belly. It's going to be harder to get into the low back, but we are still actively breathing into our back. And on the exhale, drawing the navel in as you scoop. Continue to draw it in, even at the end range. How much activation can you get from that lower core when you're fully in that cat position? Again, we can come off the wrists a little bit, take a little pressure off of them, roll them out just to get some flow. And now we're going to walk our hands forward, playing a little bit in the child's pose position. Nice spread out hands, active elbows. I don't want the elbows to bend. I want them to be extended actively, and we are pressing downward into the floor. If you have shoulder weakness or pain, it's okay to have more weight in your hips over your knees and less weight in your shoulders and hands. If you feel pretty strong in your shoulders and core, then I want the hips as much over your knee, on top of your knees as possible. I don't want them to get behind you unless your shoulders are a little compromised due to pain. So we got these nice active hands. Inhale, filling up that crocodile breath. On the exhale, draw the navel to spine as you reach your hips back a little bit, dropping the sternum to the floor, continuing to press down through the hands. Inhale, we're rocking up, filling up our crocodile breath. Exhale, reaching our sternum to the floor. I want to squeeze into that end range at the bottom. I'm pressing my hands into the floor and I'm reaching my sternum. And with each one, I'm pressing into that end range, lightly squeezing into it to see if I can get a little further without going to pain. And notice the difference in the right shoulder compared to the left shoulder. Do they feel the same? Do you feel like you can press through both hands evenly, or does one shoulder and hand feel a little weaker? Or maybe even does it feel neurologically less connected or physically less stable on the floor? Really, really good things to kind of pay attention to. And we're going to come off our hands and we're going to get into our V-sit position. Nice wide spread legs. Actively pulling the dorsum of the foot back towards the shin and actively reaching the knees down into the floor. I want to be active here as straight as possible. You may get some stretch in the back of the hamstrings or legs, and you may notice that your quads kind of tighten up. Hands can come down to the floor behind you, pressing down to keep your spine nice and tall. And I want to spiral those elbow pits outward in order to feel that shoulders draw down the back and that chest kind of open up towards the ceiling. And we're going to focus on our knee spirals now. Just like we did with the elbows, I want to see how far can we turn both knees as far in as you can and as far out as you can. But I want to make sure we're going slow and squeezing into that end range to start with. I don't want to force it. I want to be light. Inhale as your foot comes to center. Exhale as it moves to the edge of each side. Inhale at center, and then exhale as you spiral out, and then same thing as you spiral in. I want to stay connected to the breath so that we move slowly. We're still in our crocodile breath, so we're still expanding on the inhale, drawing navel into the spine on the exhale. And with each one, we're seeing if we can squeeze more range out of our internal rotation and more range out of our external rotation. Again, continuing to actively pull the dorsum of the foot back and actively straighten the knees towards the floor. And start to notice if there is a difference on the right side and the left side. Is there a difference in internal rotation? Does one go further and does one feel tighter and more restricted? Same thing on the external rotation. Does one go further and does one feel tighter and more restricted? Super common for there to be a pairing, an oppositional pairing, where one side opens more externally and the other side closes more internally in the same direction, and then you have restriction on the opposite side for both sides. That's pretty common. Or you may have one side that just moves and just doesn't rotate very well in either direction. And what you find there is actually really, really beneficial and helpful when it comes to the things that we can work on, especially if there's pain present in the body. So I want to notice if it's something paired through both sides, you rotate into the right, towards the right with both legs well and not as well to the left, or vice versa. Next, we're going to start to kind of free the ankles. As you spiral out, point the toes. I want to make sure that we're pointing them. I don't want to get a little like Charlie horse in the arch of the foot. So I want to, go nice and soft. We're spiraling all the way in and then pulling the toes back, making a circle at the ankle. I want to make sure that we are staying actively straight at the knees. And with each one, we're seeing if we can point the toes a little further. If you feel okay, we can even get a little flex in the toes. But at this point, I want to be cautious, because if you have any kind of imbalances at the feet, you're probably going to start to get a little of that Charlie horse, that grippy discomfort that can be hard to get out of sometimes. As we're pulling back, see if you can spread the toes out as wide as possible, the knuckles of the foot as wide as possible, until you get back to your point, and then nice flex. And then we're going to reverse directions, doing the same thing. Nice open spiral through that foot and knee. Seeing if you can spread the toes at the top, and can you flex them as you point and reach. Notice how that gets a nice kind of flossing effect at the ankle joint. Then we'll come back to our starting point, pulling the dorsum of the foot back to the knee, actively reaching the knees down. And if you're able to at this point, see if we can free our hands, and we're going to get a little forward fold work in order to get some length through the back of the legs. Inhale at the top, exhale, drawing navel into spine, and just lightly reach the hands forward. Inhale as you're coming back up. This is one where I like to imagine hands are the wave of moving up a beach, cresting at the top and then receding back. And I want to keep it nice and slow and rhythmic with our breath. Exhale, drawing the navel into spine. Inhale, filling up the belly, allowing it to lift our spine tall. Back to our exhale and reach. As we're doing this, notice if there's more tension on the right side of the leg compared to the left side. Is one side tighter and more restricted? And now we can start to add a little deviation from center, moving a little bit to the right with both hands and a little bit to the left with both hands. As we're reaching with our hands, Allow your chest to turn and square up where you're reaching so that your fingers move the same distance. I don't want one hand reaching further. See how far you can reach with both hands even together. And feel that nice length at the back of the legs. We can take this all the way out to heels if you have the range of motion. We can even go beyond the heels, playing with going back and forth. Again, I want to kind of get a good feel for the difference of the right side compared to the left side. And now we're going to come into our shin box work. So coming back kind of into an inverted position that we started on. Hands are behind. And we're going to start by just working through windshield wipers. Since we're just in that V-sit looking at internal to external rotation, I want to do the same thing with our shin box. Letting the knees drop. I want to make sure we have space so our knee to move behind our heels so our feet aren't too close together so you're not clumping on top. So feet are a little spread. See if you can get the knees to the floor on one side, bringing all the way across, knees on the floor to the other side. I want to make sure that this is not painful at the hips or the knees. So I'm only allowing my knees to go as far as they can go without pain either at the knees or the hips. So if you have knee pain, and this is, you're starting to get to a level 1 or a 2 right here, then this is as far as you go, and you go to the other side, and you just keep working back and forth through that range. Eventually, what you're going to find, if you keep the pain level on the side of, below that level 3, is eventually the knees are going to touch the floor, and then we can start to sit a little bit taller into it. So if you're finding that you can't touch the knees, then this is really as far as you can go in the shin box series. And so in that, as I go into the next movements, I want you to just continue to work on this. Low level, non-painful. If you can get the knees down and you can start to sit up, now we can get into some more of our hip work. We're going to get into some light folds to start with. Knee is kind of the arrow here. I want to get a nice little reach through that knee, seeing if I can reach my sternum through that knee. Exhale as you reach. Inhale, we're coming back up, and we're going to windshield wiper all the way across to the other side and doing the exact same thing. Knee is the arrow, reaching the sternum and the hands through the knee. Inhale as we come up and go back to the other side. With each one, as we reach, we're squeezing into that end range. I don't want to force it. I want to see how far we can go comfortably, non-painfully. But squeezing into it to see if we can get a little bit more on each one, keeping that pain level below a level 3 on a scale of 1 to 10. Again, continuing to use our crocodile breath. Exhale, drawing that navel in as you reach. Inhale, inflating the belly, that abdominal space as you return to center, and then exhale as you go to the other side. Again, if you're at a point of like level 1 and 2 of discomfort, this is probably the end of where you want to go. I don't want to push our shin box into a level of pain. If you're not in pain, I want to start to work on opening up the hips just a little bit. We're continuing to fold. I don't need to follow the knee as the arrows as much, but I'm continuing to use my breath as a guide as we move back and forth. Again, opening up that hip a little bit more. This is going to get a little bit different kind of stretch and mobilization into that back hip as well as the front hip. So I want to start to really notice, how does this back hip feel from one side to the other? Is the right side tighter and more restricted? Is it harder to open up that hip on one side? Again, all of these little bits of information that you can take notes on, can be really helpful when it comes to our sessions together, because it tells me a lot about what's going on in the body and where we need to put some focus in order to get things to move with a little bit more efficiency and smoothness. With each one, we'll continue to kind of slowly open up that back hip a little bit more if possible. And then we'll come back up to our starting point, shin box. Again, making sure that we're able to maintain this particular position, knee side hand is going to come down to the floor, pressing that palm, lifting the sternum up, and spiral that elbow pit out, similar to what we did in our inverted position. I want to be real active through the shoulder, and we're going to move through our back hip. The inside of the knee is a pivot point, and I'm reaching through that knee to feel my hip bone move forward. I want to see if we can feel a stretch through the front of this hip. Inhale, let the hip soften. Exhale, reach. This back hip has to come off the floor. It's really kind of rounding up and over my opposite hip. It has to come off the floor in order to get into this position. I want to see how far can I get here to feel this stretch. And I want to squeeze into that stretch as I turn into it. Inhale, letting it soften. Exhale, drawing navel into the spine as you reach. And I want to add one other little cue here that I normally don't add in. As we reach that hip bone forward, see if you can scoop your pelvis, your tailbone, into it. I'm moving the tailbone forward, getting that scoop to see if you can draw that stretch out even a little bit more through the front of the hip. And you may even notice that glute kind of tighten up as well. Again, continuing to use that breath width. And then we'll move and do it back to the other side and do the same thing. Again, this is one where I really want to notice the difference between right side and left side. Palm down, spiraled elbow, open chest, grounded shoulder, pivoting through that knee point on the knee contact to the floor to feel the hip bone move forward. Inhale as you soften, exhale, drawing navel to spine as you reach. Is this side tighter, more restricted, or is it looser and easier than the other side? Side's tighter. My left hip is usually tighter in this position. And again, I want to come back to that other cue that I kind of gave in that's new. As you reach, see if you can scoop your tailbone into it a little bit more as you exhale. And then exhale, inhale, and let it soften, letting the hip come back. Exhale, scooping into it. See if you can draw that stretch out a little bit more in the front. See if you can feel your glute tightening up more in the rear. And squeezing into each rep with a little bit more, trying to get a little bit more range of motion out of it without forcing it and without going to pain. And then we're going to bring it back across. And now we're going to add to it. We're going to do our hip extension, scooping that pelvis into it. And this is where I want to imagine I got a piece of bread and I got a buddy over here, Mr. Skeletor, and I want to hand that bread off to him. But I'm pushing through that back knee, scooping into the pelvis to feel that first stretch, and then adding my reach in order to draw that length out. Again, I want to stay soft with it, so I'm squeezing into that end range. Inhale, bringing it all the way back, and we're going to move across to the other side. Pressing through that knee, extending the hip, scoop the pelvis, reach and rotate to share your bread. Bring it all the way across. On the inhale, back to the other side. I want to go side to side on this. It's kind of a little bit of a flow moving from one side to the other, but it gives us a really good sense of comparison. Can you push through that knee? Can you scoop into that pelvis? Can you reach and rotate as far? Does it feel tighter and more restricted on one side? If so, where? Where does it feel tighter and more restricted? We'll do a couple more back and forth, continuing to breathe into that belly on the inhale, exhale, drawing the navel into spine as you reach. Nice. And then we are going to go ahead and stand up. And so this, I want to kind of couple this movement with our V-sit. We're in our nice wide stance. I'm really kind of focusing a lot more deep into the hip socket, although we're going to get into some other stuff as well, but my focus is primarily on the hips, working internal to external rotation, making sure the feet are perfectly forward. I don't want the feet turning out. And you may have to check in with your feet throughout this because one foot's probably going to want to turn out as you go through the movement. That's pretty normal. With our feet out, I also want to maintain a solid tripod foot. I'll come back to the foot in just a second. We're going to work letting our hips drop one side, coming back up, and then dropping lightly to the other side. As I drop, I want to feel the weight of my hip in my heels. I don't want my hips to go forward into the balls of the feet. Notice if they go forward, how my knee moves forward over my toes. If I'm in my hips sink back over my heels and my knees stay in place over the ankles. So I want this sitting back as much as possible. And we're going from one side all the way across to the other side. You can feel the weight of the hips in the heels as you come up. And then exhale, drawing navel in as we sink. Inhale, filling up that crocodile breath as we come back up. Now I want to come back to our feet. I want to maintain a tripod connection to the floor. As I sit to the right side, I don't want my pinky toe on my left side to roll off the floor. In fact, I want to keep pressure on it, which means I have to actively press all the way out to the outside of my foot as I'm moving to the opposite side, which is really hard to do. And same thing as we come up and go across to the other side. I want to make sure we're not moving into pain and that you have good core control. I don't want to get into a position that feels precarious where you might fall. So don't force it. Based on how comfortable you feel, we're going to work on, can you sink a little deeper on each one? Again, feeling the weight of the hips in the heels, not letting the heels lift up off the floor, not allowing that weight to go into the balls of the feet. Notice that we're getting some activation into the glutes, but really the big thing that we're feeling is, can you feel that stretch on the inner thigh as you're moving away from it? How does it feel on the right side compared to the left side? And then we're going to come all the way back down to the floor, laying on our back. And I want to come back to our crocodile breath, big C shapes with our hands, pressing them in below the ribs and above the pelvis, the pelvic bone. And I want to come back in and kind of re-cue that breath. On the inhale, we're pressing out into all 6 points of contact. On the exhale, drawing navel into spine and allowing our hands to squeeze in a little bit to give a little bit of resistance so that on the inhale, we have something to press into in that 360-degree crocodile or balloon breath. Notice if it feels a little bit easier now than it did at the beginning of the class. After you get about 2 or 3 breaths in, just to connect that breath. I want to continue that breath, but we're going to let our hands drop. We're going to let our legs go flat, nice and straight. And if you can, we're going to bring arms up overhead. They can kind of go out to a Y position. I want to make sure that the elbows feel nice and soft on the floor and that this is not painful on the shoulders. If you have back pain, back issues, this section of the class may not be a good section for you. If any of this, I want you to make sure you go slow through anything, and if you have pain, I'd rather you stop and contact me than go through it. If you can go through these without pain, then great. We're gonna do baby rolls, and I wanna try to stay connected with that crocodile breath as we go through our baby rolls. So we're gonna start with a reach across with our hands. Head has to lift up off the floor in order to make this reach, but I kind of want to start with pressing our heel into the floor in order to push to open up our shoulder to be able to reach. I don't want that heel to lift up. I want it to maintain contact with the floor. So we're going to inhale at center, draw the navel in as we push through our heel to see how far can you reach across, as if we're rolling all the way onto our belly, right? Except I want that heel to remain in contact, so there's only so far I can go. Inhale, we're coming back all the way to center, and exhale, we're going to the other side, pressing through the heel, reaching across the body. I want to stay connected with the breath, so we're going slow, and we are squeezing into the end range, pressing the heel down as you're reaching the fingertips across at the same time that you're exhaling. With each one, we're seeing if we can reach just a little bit further without taking it to stress or pain. And that pain, it can be in the back, it can be in the shoulder, it can be in the neck. I want to make sure that if you're in pain, I'd rather you back off and contact me than to continue going through this. With each one, seeing if you can reach the fingertips a little bit further. And then we'll come back to center. And now we're going to do the same thing, but moving from our feet. Same thing, except I'm not going to push into the hands. We don't need that pressure, but I do want to make sure that we are at least maintaining some contact of the upper arm with the floor, preferably the back of the palm. I don't want it to lift up off the floor. I want to maintain some contact. We're going to lift a foot. I want to kind of keep that foot elevated. I don't want it to drop down and slide on the floor, so I'm kind of reaching as if I'm reaching up to a shelf on the wall, reaching with those toes and seeing how far can I reach, as if I'm going to roll over onto my belly, but without losing contact of the back of my hand. Inhale, coming back to center. Exhale, drawing navel to spine as we go to the other side. Again, nice and slow to make sure that we are staying connected to breath. I don't want to try to go far on the first few. I want to go slow and kind of, again, slowly squeeze in more and more into the range, seeing if we can get a little bit more on each one. So I don't want to start trying to get as big of a range of motion as I possibly can. I want to start small and finish with a bigger range of motion, non-stressful bigger range of motion. I don't want it to feel forceful. I don't want it to be stressed, and I definitely don't want it to be painful. But continuing to bring that nice breath in, full inhale, full exhale, filling up the abdominal space on the inhale and drawing the navel into spine on the exhale. And then we can bring our feet back flat to the floor. And we're going to finish again with our crocodile breath, making our big C shapes, pressing them in. And for another 5 or 6 breaths. Nice full inhale. See how much can you now expand into that space of the lower back, side body, and abdominals. Can you fill that space up evenly? Or are you noticing that maybe the right side of the body does not expand as well as the left side, or vice versa? Maybe it's the back on one side doesn't move as well on the back of the other side, or it might be both sides. That's a big deal, super common, but we want to get that area to move related to your breath again. That's going to be a big deal as far as improving core stability. After 5 or 6 breaths, go ahead and relax your hands. Let your palms drop to the floor with the back of the palms up. Start to bring that breath a little bit more up into the chest and the ribs. We're still breathing into the abdominal space, but we're also allowing that breath to expand into the rib cage. Full inhale on the exhale, continuing to draw that navel in, full expression of that breath. And since we're bringing that breath a little bit more up into the ribs, feel that soft expansion. Notice if there's any areas of tension, of density, of restriction of breath. Maybe it's in one section of your ribs. Maybe it's in the chest. Maybe it's in the upper back. I want to remain soft with it. Squeeze that breath, that inhale breath at the end range, to see if it gives you a little bit more movement. And then exhale and let it go. And you can start to let that tension go as well. You can think of the breath as like a nice cleansing rain. You inhale, breathing into tension, and that exhale rinses off that tension and lets it go to the floor where you don't have to hold it in your body anymore. And go ahead and let your eyes close and just start to take a little scan of your body, noticing these areas of tension, of density, of restriction, breathing into them fully, squeezing into them lightly, and exhale, allowing them to rinse off onto the floor. If you notice any other things like some anxiety or some fear or some insecurity, or you're just noticing the pressure of your day, you can add that into that rinse. Breathe into it on the inhale, and on the exhale, let it just get rinsed off a little bit. It's not going to make it go away, but you can at least get a little relief from that pressure for a moment. Have another 2 or 3 nice full cleansing breaths. And when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes.